Hello, and a very warm welcome to our net zero discussion. Today is our day all about energy, and we're thinking about energy solutions, and we are covering a number of topics, and we've got some fantastic questions as well. My name is Savita Wilmot. I am Chief Exec of an organisation called the Natural History Consortium, which brings together organisations from across the west of England and also nationally, all about connecting people and the environment, finding new ways to get people interested in taking action for the environment. And I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'm so excited to see some of the questions that have already come in. And I hope that you, if you are happening to be watching this live, will put in some questions as well. I've got two fantastic guests here with me. We're going to have a chance to hear from each of them individually, and then the three of us are going to have a bit of a conversation with some of the questions that have come in on the theme of energy. So a very warm welcome to Toby, who you'll hear from in a little bit, and also from Sarah. So Sarah, we're going to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what your job is?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for welcoming me. And I hope I haven't given you too many technical challenges today by being at home and not at the University of West of England, but we shall see. So I'm Councillor Sarah Warren, and I was elected as a councillor for the first time just over 2 years ago. And I'm now Deputy Leader of Bath and North East Somerset Council, and also the Cabinet Lead for Climate Emergency and Sustainable Transport. And so before 2 years ago, I wasn't in politics. I used to work some way back in the NHS, and then I went and did a master's in sustainability, and I was trying to work out how I could influence policy, and that's how I came to find my way into politics. And just before I was elected, Bath and North East Somerset Council had declared a climate emergency, with the objective of providing the leadership to bring the district to net zero by 2030. So as soon as I arrived, we were trying to work out how to put that into action. So the first thing we did then was have a report done to analyse our carbon emissions to see where the biggest areas that we could make change were. And so we know there were three main areas. The first one was transport that you were talking about yesterday. The next one is energy efficiency in buildings. And the third one is renewable energy. So those are our three biggest priority areas. And another thing then happened was that last summer, we then decided it was important that we probably also declare an ecological emergency, because we know now there's lots of evidence that there's a biodiversity crisis as well as a carbon emissions crisis. And it's really important that we tackle both of them in parallel. So that's where we are. And I suppose we were just about getting things going. And then, of course, COVID hit, really. So and we lost time because the council, as all councils, was terribly busy. All the staff were busy trying to make sure that people were fed and so on, and the businesses were reimbursed. So, but anyway, so where we are is that finally we have been able, we had been planning a wonderful launch event that was all cancelled because of COVID. So in the end, what's happened is that last month in September, we finally were able to have a big climate and biodiversity festival. So we had 2 weeks in which we invited community organisations to put together events that they ran, as well as council run events. And this went out quite widely and has been very much enjoyed. And because of where we are in terms of COVID, some of it was online and some of it was in person. So that was a really exciting thing to do. The first time Baines has done something like that. And we'll be doing that, we hope, annually in future. Because it was a really big success. And I think it's really good in terms of sort of raising people's awareness in all parts of the population. So in terms of what we've actually been doing as a council to try and change things, and one of the big frustrations, I suppose, to me, being so new to politics, is how slowly things work in local government. So some of what we've been doing perhaps doesn't sound exciting, but is important in terms of putting the building blocks in place. So just last Friday, we finished consulting on something called an update to our local plan. Now, this is about planning policy. So planning policy is the rules that decide where people can build in your district and what types of building they can build. And the decisions about what you can build and where you can build it they have to be done in line with policy. It absolutely governs that. So if we can get that right for the future, then that could have an enormous impact on emissions. And our main motivation for doing this update that we consulted people on is about incorporating the climate emergency into our local plan and the biodiversity crisis as well. So some of the things we are looking for is to be much more demanding in terms of the energy efficiency of new buildings, to make it easier to retrofit old buildings, and to make sure that people only develop in places where you can use sustainable transport to get to and from those homes. So that, and then there are other measures about improving and boosting biodiversity in new developments. So that's a really important thing. And we finished consulting on that last week. And if all goes well, it will come into place by next summer. So by next summer, which is frustratingly slow from when I started in politics, but from next summer, we should start to see new developments in Bath and North East Somerset finally having much more of a relationship to our climate emergency declaration than they have up to now. Another element of that planning policy actually was about making it easier to find places to put renewable installations as well, because that's another thing, is that you need planning permission if you're going to put up wind turbines or solar panels, or big solar farms or big wind farms. And so it's about making some of that a bit easier in policy. Then on transport, there are lots of things we're trying to do. So we've been fortunate in getting some money that we will spend shortly on some new cycle tracks, both on road, and we're working on a project called the River Line project that will be off road and beside the river and green. So some new cycle routes. We're also about to go to consultation on something we're calling livable neighborhoods. So by livable neighborhoods, what we mean is that we take a residential area and we make it a nicer space to spend time in on foot and, you know, on bikes and by scooter, so that people are more tempted really to get up in the morning and go to work or go to school on foot or by scooter and leave their car at home. And there are things we can do that just makes it, you know, perhaps sometimes a little harder to get around, but a nicer space to spend time in on foot. So that's another big plank. Then we're working with the West of England Combined Authority on their plans for improvements to public transport, which is a real problem actually in Bath and North East Somerset, especially our bus service, especially the bus service in from the rural area, has really been struggling, and there have been lots of cuts to routes. So that'll be really important to if we can get to a place where we see some big improvements in bus services, whether in terms of frequency of service or the routes they go on, or reduced prices, that will really encourage people to move to that, move to buses. What else? And I suppose another big thing actually in Bath and North East Somerset that you might be aware of is that we brought in our clean air zone back in March. And actually that's not a carbon emission thing or biodiversity. That's actually about reducing nitrogen dioxide emissions, but this is about reducing air pollution that actually makes people unwell. You know, there are deaths every year that are linked to nitrogen dioxide. And so we went live with that in March, which means that if you drive one of the more polluting vans, taxis, buses, or HGVs into Bath city centre, you now have to pay to come in. And that was the first such paying clean air zone outside of London. So we did that in March, and that is still bedding in, and we are starting to see some improvements because it came with funding from government to help us to provide grants and loans to help people to upgrade their vehicles. I suppose in terms of other areas, we're looking at, so we as a council are looking at installing solar on our buildings and making them as energy efficient as possible when we upgrade them ourselves. When we're doing work on our buildings, we're looking to make them more energy efficient. There have been other things we've done as a council, like we've been working with local businesses to sign up to a plastics pledge to agree to use less plastic. And then on land use and biodiversity, that's an area so we have a pledge to plant 100,000 trees, which we'll be doing by 2023. But on wider issues of land use, I have to say that's an area where we're only just starting to get going in terms of thinking harder about how we use our land and working with landowners to make sure that what we do is, the way that people look after the soil is really important. And you can sequester sequester carbon. That means, you can, the soil, if you don't dig it too much, it actually pulls carbon back out of the atmosphere and holds on to it in the soil. So some of the things about the way that you look after your land as a landowner are really important. And as a council, it's not an area we've been much involved with, but we're starting to build up our capacity so we can do that in the future. So that's probably a quick canter through most of the things that we're doing. I suppose I would also say maybe there's things we can do about where we invest our money as well. So we're part of the Avon Pension Fund, as Toby is as well. And the Avon Pension Fund is doing some really great things in terms of disinvesting from fossil fuel companies. And as a council, we're also looking, because as a council, we have some financial holdings that we keep in the bank, and we're having a close look at those and working on how we can put them into places that are less fossil fuel intensive. So that's probably a broad summary. So I'll hand over to Toby.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah. Lots to pick up there on the theme of energy. So I know the live chat is open if people want to ask questions if you're watching this live. So Toby, over to you. Tell us a bit about your role.
Well, thank you. So I'm the leader of South Gloucestershire Council, and similar to Sarah's, an elected councillor. I was elected for the first time in 2015, and I've been leader of the council for about 3 years now. And we have made a similar declaration to become carbon neutral by 2030. And obviously, being neighbours to Sarah in Bath, North East Somerset, share a number of the same priorities. And I'll do my best not to simply repeat some of the things that Sarah's talked about. But our climate emergency action plan is broken down into sort of 3 principal parts. The first one is around to lead, the second is around to enable, and the third is to inspire. And each of those 3 components just recognises how much of a direct role the council has got in each of those areas. So in terms of where we can lead, it's very much taking responsibility for our own buildings, for our own vehicles. So we're also installing solar PV panels on a number of our council buildings and improving their carbon performance, and have made a number of sort of big strides over recent years. Our council vehicles, those that go out and do the litter picking, or to clear up drainage problems, they're increasingly electric. So moving away from sort of the combustion engine in our vehicle fleet. And then moving over then to sort of our enabling role, it's important to say that as a council we're directly responsible for about 1% of South Gloucestershire's carbon emissions. But when you add in our ability to buy in services, so as a council, we're a very large organisation, but we don't provide everything directly ourselves. We will pay other companies and other organisations to provide services for our residents. And when you take into account that level of financial resource, we then account for about 6.5% of South Gloucestershire's emissions. When you then take into account some of the powers that the council has to work with other organisations within South Gloucestershire, and particularly around planning, transport and waste, again some of the examples that Sarah's talked about, our influence on South Gloucestershire's total carbon emissions then rises to 40%. So actually, as a council, whether we've got a direct role or whether we've got a more indirect role, that is a big proportion of the carbon emissions that we could have an influence on. But of course, that's still 60% that we don't, and therefore we are reliant upon our sort of the inspire element of our climate emergency action plan, which is about how can we work with others, how can we communicate better as an area, to make sure that we can tackle the 100% that we all want to see. And I think, and particularly around that inspire bit, it's about tapping into some of the fantastic innovation and excellence that already goes on within the local area. So we're very fortunate that we've got Wildplace based in South Gloucestershire, which will soon become the permanent home of Bristol Zoo. And they're doing a huge amount around ecology and nature recovery. And Sarah talked about the importance of not only needing to take action around carbon emissions, but also taking action around nature recovery and improving biodiversity. And so actually we need to, as a council, and with all of us, need to identify those areas of excellence that we already have locally, and what can we do to sort of help them to do even more. Because amongst all of us, we have got the answers, but it's finding the right people to go to get those answers. We've also got the Wave inland surfing lake in South Gloucestershire. And again, they're doing incredible work around sustainability and supporting the local environment. But also then, just slightly further up the road, we've got our collection of aerospace companies, Airbus, Rolls-Royce, GCare. They do employ many thousands of people locally, and no doubt many of the students who are watching today or who are interested in this area will have family members working in that industry. And there's a huge amount of work going on as to how we can decarbonise aviation, because flying per se is not the problem, it's the carbon that's the problem. And there is enormous work, tremendous work going on within the industry locally on how we can reduce the carbon impact associated with flying, which I think everyone recognises we need to take urgent action on. Now, the innovation and the leaps in technology that we will see within aerospace, you can translate that over to other parts of transport and other parts of the economy. So the important work that's going on there won't ever just be limited to aviation and aerospace, but it's lessons that can be translated into other parts of the economy too. So I think it's that importance of working together and recognising where we've got those pockets of excellence that are in many cases world leading, and what can we do to really get behind them so that we can make as much progress as we can, given the urgent needs to not only reduce our carbon emissions but to also help nature recovery.
Great. Thank you both so much for a bit of an update on what's happening in your patch. We've had some questions through this morning, and they are fantastic questions, and I'd love to share them with you and see some of your thoughts. And so I think our first question really gets to the heart of some of the challenges. And the question is, what are you and your councils doing to ensure that new build environmentally friendly homes are affordable for families? It's a big question. Sarah, I'm wondering if you're willing to go first on that.
I'll have a go. So what we are doing, so through our local plan update, we are looking to be much more demanding of developers in terms of the energy efficiency that we're going to ask for from homes. And we'd like to do that across the board. Now, we are unfortunately subject to national planning policy, which may limit quite how demanding we can be, but we're keen to push that as far as we can. And then in terms of affordability, I suppose that's about, again, us as a planning authority. When developers come to us saying they want to put in a lot of homes, 100 homes or something like that, then we are able to ask for a certain percentage to be affordable or to be social. Another strand of our work is that we as a council are creating more social housing, which again, when we do that now, we are trying to make it as energy efficient as we possibly can. So we are bringing forward social housing of that sort. And so was the question solely about new build, or do you want me to talk about energy?
I won't ask you all to do both, but for this one, Toby, I'm wondering if you have a thought on that as well.
So we're doing a lot of what Sarah has just talked about, particularly around our planning policies. A new area of activity for us in South Gloucestershire is about actually whether we can acquire land. So usually with the planning system, the council reacts to applications that are made by other people who own land. And so we're thinking about actually, should the council acquire the land? Because the moment, I'm not going to quote figures because I'm not directly involved in buying land, but when a piece of land achieves a residential consent, so the moment that the council approves the building of homes, the value of that land shoots up. And I think what we're interested in seeing is how can we capture that increase in land value that comes with the council making a decision to allow homes to be built on it. Because if we can capture that uplift in value, we can potentially increase the level of affordable housing on that site, or we can put that money into improving transport locally, or we can put that money into even higher levels of environmental sustainability for those homes. So I think we're trying to understand how we can have more of an influence on the economics behind house building, so we can positively respond to the question that we've been asked.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to come back to you, Toby, with a question about innovation, but just staying on this topic of homes for a second, Sarah. We've had another question that's not about new build, but about people, in their existing homes. And the question is what incentives, you might have for people looking to upgrade their boiler or improve their insulation, make some of those energy changes at home. Is there something you can share with us about that?
Yeah, so there are lots of grants and loans available actually, and most of them don't come directly from the council, but what we do at Bath and North East Somerset is we've got a part of our website. So if you go to our website and put in energy at home, that will take you to a page which lists off lots of different things you can do to your home to make it more energy efficient. Some of them are cheap and some of them are expensive. And then it takes you to details of funding that you can get to help you with that. Some of those grants are targeted at older people, some are targeted at people on low incomes and so on. So there might very well be a grant or a loan that suits that.
Gist of her answer there was that there's a lot of information on the Bath and North East Somerset Council website, and that's probably true for the council where you are as well. So back to you, Toby, and you were saying about some of the innovation that's happening in South Gloucestershire. We've had a fantastic question asking if we're looking at becoming carbon neutral, what role hydrogen-powered cars might be. Now, I don't think you're a hydrogen-powered car expert, but have you heard about this technology? Do you know anything that's happening in the region?
So we're increasingly hearing more about hydrogen and its potential. But I think, increasingly for a lot of these things, particularly around technological innovation, it feels like you need to be an expert and to properly get your head around a lot of these things. And I think that there certainly is going to be, I think the consensus is that there absolutely is a role for hydrogen to help us move towards net zero. What we haven't quite worked out is how exactly hydrogen can be used, in what parts of our economy, in what areas of our community, because I think there are particular issues around hydrogen, some pros and cons. But it's very much being talked about. It's being talked about with increasing excitement and enthusiasm. We just need to conclude what it is exactly that hydrogen can provide for us.
And I think a related question was asking about, sustainable ways to produce electricity for electric cars, and that seems to be a really rich area for research. Now, I don't know if you have a crystal ball, but the other question was, will electric cars become cheaper? What do you think?
As technology continues to improve and it continues to be refined, you usually find that it reduces in cost. Very often, the very first prototypes, the very first versions of a new technology do tend to be very expensive, and that does exclude a lot of people from being able to buy that sort of technology. But actually, as the months and years go by, the technology improves, the cost of producing it falls, and that means that fall in cost can be passed on to the consumer, and so gradually things do become more affordable. But I think importantly though, we can't just wait for technology to naturally become cheaper. So there absolutely is a role for the public sector to be subsidising some of these technologies, so that people who are at the bottom end of the income scale are able to afford to be able to make use of this technology. But actually, I'll just come back to that original point that we've seen in the past and we see today how the cost of things falls as the technology improves.
What about this question that I put to Sarah, who I think is not quite with us yet, about incentives and what people are able to do at home now about their own energy efficiency?
So as Sarah was saying, each council will have its own website and sort of web page. So anybody within South Gloucestershire, if you go onto the South Gloucestershire Council website, our scheme is called Warm and Well, and again that's a really helpful source of advice that will point you in the right direction depending on your circumstances, because different people with different circumstances are eligible for different schemes, but there's a lot out there, and at times can be quite confusing and for some people quite overwhelming in terms of the level of choice that there is out there. But as local councils, we try to make it easy for people to navigate their way through that maze, so that ultimately you do find the right solution for you.
Yeah. Now, Toby, would you mind if we went slightly away from the energy theme onto transport? Because there were some questions that came in yesterday, and people who didn't get their question answered, and I think there's some really good ones in there, if you can switch over to transport. So
I'll do my best.
a big one that came through, and a really important question was around bicycle use and how different councils, so how in South Gloucestershire you're supporting cycling. So I think there's a question and concern about bike lanes, places to lock up bikes. What are you thinking about cycling strategies right now?
So we're not just thinking, we're already doing. As we speak, there are a number of projects that are underway at the moment in terms of building new cycle lanes, so that actually people don't have to cycle on the road, because I think for a lot of people one of the big barriers to cycling is the fear of actually having to cycle on the road. Roads that are busy, noisy, and it can be quite intimidating if you're starting cycling for the first time. And so I think we do need to have more segregated cycle lanes across South Gloucestershire and across the region as well, because recognising that there are a lot of people in South Gloucestershire who live locally, but they work perhaps in Bristol or they work in Bath. And equally there will be Bath residents and Bristol residents who work in South Gloucestershire. So actually we need to be thinking about how these cycle lanes and the improvement in infrastructure can crosses boundaries. Boundaries that normal people don't know where they are. But if you're a council geek, you know exactly where the council boundaries start and finish. But also it's recognising that actually once you get to wherever it is you're going to go, actually have you got somewhere safe and secure that you can actually leave your bike. Particularly now, as lots of people lots more people are buying e-bikes. E-bikes are expensive, and but they're a valuable piece of kit. So actually, if you want to know that if you're going to leave it somewhere, that you're leaving it somewhere that is safe and secure, and that people aren't going to be able to steal it. So there are and improving cycle parking and the security of cycle parking is another important action that we are now taking. So we're currently building the 8 park and ride, and we see that park and ride as being a sort of flagship mobility hub. You know, it's not only about cars coming in to drive to then catch the bus. Actually, we want people to be able to cycle.
A great question we've had about public transport, which I know is an ongoing challenge, but the question says, buses don't link up everywhere I need to go and they're expensive. How can we improve public transport?
So Sarah, in one of her answers earlier, talked about our work with the West of England Combined Authority. So the West of England Combined Authority covers Bristol, South Gloucestershire and part of North East Somerset, and it is responsible for joining together transport within the region. And so as that transport authority, WECA is the abbreviation is, has those transport powers to be bringing together the bus companies so that they can provide a more integrated system, so that actually if you are trying to get from one side of the region to the other, you know that if you are having to change buses, that actually you're changing at those interchanges in a way that's convenient for you, and that you're not going to be stuck waiting for ages in the cold and wet, particularly as we're now moving into the winter months.
Exactly. Now, you've had a lot of questions from the young people, and you're doing the most of it as we get Sarah back online. What questions, I know you can't see our audience right now, what questions would you pose to our students about, transport and energy and some of these key things, either to help you with your work or out of curiosity?
Well, yeah, so I think, I talked about the importance of the Inspire bit of the Councillors' action plan. We recognise that, we're not going to be able to do this on our own. We can only do this by working together. Everybody has got a role. And I think it's, come to us with your ideas. Because, we know that we don't have all the ideas. Nobody has a monopoly on all the ideas that we need in order to get us to those ambitious climate goals that we have. So we want to hear from people, and especially those who have got a keen interest in this area. They're studying it. They'll likely move into work around this whole area, because it's innovation and improving technology that is going to do so much of the heavy lifting, which we know that we've got in order to meet those very ambitious climate goals.
And thinking ahead, all the students participating have another day tomorrow, and tomorrow is on waste. And the kind of key question they're looking at is about how we might reduce or reuse, up to 65% of our waste. What are some of the themes or topics our students could be thinking about as they're getting ready for the things tomorrow? Welcome back, Sarah. We're just going to ask Toby about waste. I've taken him from energy to transport, now to waste.
Maybe Sarah can do waste.
Sarah, our students are going to be talking about waste tomorrow as a key theme, and this is kind of a chance to put some questions back to them. What are some of the kind of key things that you'd encourage them to think about?
Oh, that's a really interesting question, because what I've been wondering about, maybe you can tell me the answer. So given that we're recycling a lot in Bath and North East Somerset, but we still do have residual waste for the time being. I can't foresee a time yet when we won't have residual waste, and we know that landfill can be very damaging in the sense that what is the words? The sort of runoff that goes out into the soil and so on, and the gases that can be given off to the environment. So we try to avoid that as much as possible. But what that has meant is that we, as part of the West of England, have taken out contracts with energy from waste companies who burn some of that residual waste, and they do take the energy out, which is a good thing. But of course, now there's increasing concerns around air quality. And I want to know what the answer is, because we've got problems with landfill and we've got problems with energy from waste burning, but we do still have residual waste. I'd like someone to tell me what the answer is to that.
Just going back to transport, now that you're back with us, Sarah, we did have a few questions that weren't answered yesterday, so we wanted to bring them back. And there was a question about city centre congestion. Now, you've touched on the clean air zone, but I'm wondering if you could say something about congestion in particular, and just how these measures are related.
Yeah, so the Clean Air Zone is part of a government scheme, which all came about because the government was taken to court by clean air campaigners who were campaigning against the amount of nitrogen dioxide in the air. So government essentially instructed councils to respond and gave them some very clear steers about how to respond. So Bath City was instructed to put in a clean air zone, which had to be structured in this way. So that what we do is they've defined the groups of engine classes, which are the ones with the highest nitrogen dioxide emissions, and we charge those types of vehicles with the highest emissions for entering the city centre. But of course, and then it comes with money to upgrade the vehicles. So if you've got an older and more highly emitting vehicle, you're able to get access money to get a more modern vehicle, which is really great. And if you've got a business, you're a business owner or even a camper van owner, and you find you're suddenly having to pay to come into Bath, that's a very good thing, because you can have a modern vehicle and you can have some support with that. But what it doesn't do then is reduce the overall numbers of vehicles in the city. So we're still going to have congestion, and we're still going to have, although we won't have so much nitrogen dioxide, there are other kinds of pollution. So there's particulates pollution, which actually comes off of brake pads and off of tyres on turning on the road. So we still have that. So we need to be tackling that. And I mean, I suppose the only way to address that is to give people alternatives to the car and then encourage them to use them. So the question is how we approach that. So, I mean, in Bath and North East Somerset, what we're doing at the moment is we're trying to get involved with WECA, the West of England Combined Authority, in improving bus services and making them more affordable, and in putting out cycle lanes. But I suppose the question is, with car use so just ingrained in our culture, is that on its own going to be enough? Or there are cities. So obviously London has a congestion charge, and I discovered recently that the centre of Durham has a congestion charge and was the first one in the UK. There are questions about what should we do, and I don't have the answers. But are there things we can do, as well as making the alternatives to cars more attractive? Are there things we can do that are slight disincentives to motoring? So there are other things you can do. We can control the price that people pay for parking. We can, and that's something we can do as a council. We can try to adjust the prices of bus tickets as compared to where it's a bus service that we control, which of course most bus services we don't, because they're private bus services. So, but we can, with the park and rides, we have some control over. We can try to control the price of park and ride, as opposed to no, I've lost my train of thought. But it's about, are there things you can do to adjust the price to disincentivize people from driving in? Another thing we're doing in Bath and North East Somerset is residents parking zones. So we're looking at the price of those. So.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I think we've just about out of time, and I'm pleased to say that we've gone through all of the students' questions. So I'm just going to come back to you both just for kind of two last things to close up. First is, can you tell us about something that's coming across your desk this week? What are you going to see on your desk when you go back to work this afternoon that's related to energy, transport, or waste? What's kind of top of your agenda? And then to finish, I'm going to ask you each to kind of give a thought or a bit of a challenge back to our students as they go on with the rest of the afternoon. So Toby, either one that you would like to start with. What's on your desk and what's your challenge?
So yeah, my desk, what's on my desk, sort of transport, waste or energy related. What I'm hoping will be in my inbox when I next log into it. We've submitted a bid into government. We're working with a number of councils on a fusion prototype reactor that we want to pursue in South Gloucestershire and working with a number of other councils, as I said, because we want to encourage that sort of innovation and that is going to be so important in helping us to meet our energy needs, particularly if we want to meet those energy needs from low to zero carbon sources. And I think actually pushing the sort of the frontiers of technology is something that we've got a strong track record of doing in South Gloucestershire. I talk about our aviation and aerospace history, and it's that sort of attitude and approach that we want to to push on through other areas as well. So that's something that we're waiting to hear on imminently from the government, and fingers crossed that is going to be successful, and we're expecting that any day now. In terms of a challenge to your students, I would say to never give up, putting forward your ideas and your views, even if at times it feels that you're not being listened to or you're being knocked back. If you believe in something, keep pushing at it, keep going, and if you're not satisfied with the responses that you're getting, then think about standing for election, where you are then actually able to do something about it, either at the local level, the regional level, or potentially the national level.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Over to you. What's on your desk this week?
So I've got something that comes across my desk quite regularly is people who write into me who say, I've got a listed building in Bath because we live in a World Heritage Site. I'd like to do much more in terms of energy efficiency. Can you help me? So because this is sort of, because with the World Heritage status that Bath has, it means that the planning laws around developing those buildings, so to put solar panels on them or to put internal wall insulation in, it is very tricky. So I was on the radio at the weekend talking about this, and I think it's a debate that we need to have. We need to start a debate around where is the line between, making the most of our wonderful heritage in our part of the country, and lots of the reasons that people want to come to Bath and Bristol are because of that history and that heritage, and where is the line between that and us ensuring that those homeowners can get involved in reducing carbon emissions, and that people live in those houses can be warm and comfortable, and they won't be too expensive to heat. So that's an interesting one. And I thought about, I suppose one strand of a challenge could be for the students to go away and think about that and try and work out where the line is. But I do like Toby's idea, and I think I would a much bigger and sort of grander challenge is everyone who's watching this, you've all got a different skill set, so some of you will be really great at physics, some of you will be really great at talking to people.
Thank you to both Toby and to Sarah and to everyone who's been watching, thinking and putting in questions. Now I have the honour of chairing the session tomorrow. If you're watching this live, I'll be doing another session tomorrow. So if you go away and think of some questions on energy or waste or transport, we will pick them up tomorrow. So big thank you to my guest, and enjoy the rest of your programme.